Elena felt her heart racing faster than ever, and the sound of her own breath grew ragged in her ears. She stood by the grand ballroom doors, watching everyone laugh and dance under the shimmering chandeliers. In front of the crowd, Adrian Knight, one of the richest men in the country, wore a forced smile. He was the man who had survived tragedy after tragedy, yet had risen to unbelievable power and wealth. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of his latest triumph, but something was not right. One glance at his eyes told Elena that Adrian was on the verge of unraveling. He was hiding a lifetime of sorrow. She noticed how he clenched his fists behind his back, as though trying to contain a deep wound that no one else could see. He had people looking up to him, praising his success. But behind that facade of strength stood a lonely, conflicted man. She could see it because she had watched him closer than anyone else. She was only the maid, but she had seen him in his most vulnerable moments. She knew that whenever he disappeared from big parties like this, it was because he wanted to cry in private, away from mocking eyes and worthless gossip. Tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy with dread. Elena noticed that Adrian was pale, and he kept pressing his palm against his chest, near his heart, as though in pain. Concern twisted in her stomach. This was not the first time she had seen that dark look on his face, but it was the first time he looked truly broken. A few partygoers whispered among themselves, puzzled why the host had suddenly gone so quiet. Others were too busy enjoying the music. The band was playing a lively tune, and couples were spinning across the polished floor. Yet Adrian's body language told Elena he was fighting back something big. She spotted a tremor in his right hand, the kind that usually came before tears. Elena's lips felt dry, and she knew she had to do something. The idea that raced through her mind was reckless, bold, and absolutely unheard of, especially for someone in her position. But if she did not help him, Adrian might fall apart in front of everyone, and that sight would only lead to more pain for him. She could not stand it. Her stomach churned, and her feet felt glued to the spot. Yet she knew she had to act, and the choice would change everything. She took one shaky step forward. She could still recall the times he seemed so fragile, and how her heart ached for him then. She could recall how his eyes softened whenever he allowed himself to truly see her, not just as a maid, but as a person who understood him. With each step toward the center of the ballroom, Elena's pulse quickened. She had never done anything like this. She had never been bold. She had always been shy, especially around Adrian. But if she just watched him break, she would never forgive herself. The moment arrived too soon. She found herself standing right behind him, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body through his suit jacket. The fear pulsed in her chest so fiercely that she thought she might faint. Then, in front of all those people, she reached up, tugged lightly on his arm to turn him around, and pressed her lips to his. The world around them froze. The music stuttered to a halt, and gasps spread through the entire gathering like a wave. The gentle hush that followed was more unnerving than any shriek. Nobody could believe what the shy maid had just done. Elena felt every nerve in her body go numb, but she also felt a wild swirl of emotions erupt in her soul. It was a simple kiss, but it was the most terrifying thing she had ever dared to do. Adrian stared at her with wide eyes, tears brimming at the corners. His lips trembled. For a moment, he was too stunned to respond. The entire hall seemed caught in suspended time. Then, something broke inside him. He dropped to his knees, covering his face with his hands, and cried. In that moment, Elena realized this was no ordinary sob. These were tears from a place so deep, so painful, that it almost scared her. She sensed the shock and confusion of the crowd behind them. People whispered. Some stepped back, uncertain whether they should comfort the billionaire or label him as weak. Someone snapped a photograph, adding to the swirl of tension. Elena knelt beside him. She had no idea if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or if she had saved him from an invisible storm. She did not know that, in many ways, this scene would change both of their destinies forever. Yet, at that very moment, all she could think about was the depth of his grief, how his entire body shook with every sob, and how the tears were not stopping. She gently reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. That was the point where the room started whispering again. Some glances were full of pity. Others were sharp with anger or disapproval. A few were simply stunned. Elena's mind spun. She, a simple maid, had kissed the wealthiest man in the country in front of everyone. She had never dreamed something like this would happen. She never planned it. She never planned to humiliate him or take advantage of him. It was a gut feeling, a need to stop his collapse. But now, the moment had come, and there was no going back. She felt a mix of panic and shock, but mostly concern for Adrian. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice shaking. She saw him turn his gaze to her, eyes red and wet with tears. She felt something in his stare, surprise, desperation, perhaps even gratitude. All at once, she realized she had to find out why he was crying this way, what she had truly stirred inside him. Because there, in the center of the lavish ballroom, while onlookers gasped and pointed, Adrian Knight, the billionaire who usually seemed untouchable, was letting his heart break open for all to see. Elena Martinez had always been a quiet soul. She grew up in a modest home, her parents laboring in a local market. They taught her the values of honesty and hard work. She didn't have many friends, only a few from her childhood days. Elena preferred solitude, spending her free hours reading simple romance novels from the library. Those stories made her heart flutter, but she never believed any of those wonderful tales would happen to her. She was not rich, not glamorous, and she was shy. When Elena turned 19, she secured a maid position at the Knight Mansion. The estate was vast, with long, winding corridors, gleaming marble floors, and tall windows that seemed to reach for the ceiling. The gardens were lush, full of rare flowers and artful landscaping. She remembered how her heart pounded the first time she stepped onto the estate grounds. For a girl from a humble background, it felt like stepping into another universe.
The staff was large, each person assigned to different duties. Elena's main task was to clean and organize Adrian Knight's personal wing. He lived in a section of the mansion that others dared not approach unless they were requested. She was given a small, neat room on the outskirts of the staff area. It was nothing extravagant, but it was more than she had ever imagined. She was thankful for a steady job that helped her send money home to her parents. In her early days at the mansion, Elena rarely saw Adrian. He traveled often, managing new projects, attending global conferences, or closing deals. When he was home, he was often locked in his home office, studying documents, attending video conferences, or entertaining important guests. Elena was told by some staff members that Adrian Knight was intimidating. He was known to be strict and demanded perfection. No errors were allowed. However, they also whispered that he was fair. He rewarded good work generously and never scolded staff without reason. Elena made sure to be diligent and never cut corners. Still, she did not forget the first time she set eyes on him. It was late one evening, almost midnight. She was returning from cleaning the library and had paused at a window near the main hall. She saw him step out of his limousine, dressed in a crisp suit. She had heard staff gossip about how handsome he was, but hearing rumors and seeing him in person were entirely different experiences. Tall, with broad shoulders, Adrian Knight carried himself with a powerful aura. His face was fine-featured, yet there was a hint of sadness in his eyes, even in that distant moment. Elena hid behind the curtain, feeling her cheeks grow warm. She did not know why she felt so shy, but she realized then that no matter how grand or imposing he was, there was something fragile about him, something that made her want to know more. For many weeks, Elena continued her usual chores, mindful of every detail in Adrian's private rooms. She would dust his shelves, pick up scattered papers from his desk, and align his books. She made sure everything was neat by the time Adrian returned from his many trips. She did this quietly, never seeking his attention. But fate had different plans. One afternoon, while Elena was restocking the library with his favorite reference books, Adrian suddenly walked in. She tensed. She felt as if she had been caught trespassing, though she was merely doing her job. He paused by the door, studying her for a moment with those intense brown eyes. "You are new," he said simply, his voice low. "Yes, Mr. Knight," Elena replied politely, feeling her heart hammer in her chest. He nodded and continued inside, searching for a particular volume. Elena attempted to slip away, not wanting to be in his way. "Wait," he called, turning to her. "Do you know where the book on historical estates is? The thick blue one." She had just placed that book on the top shelf a moment ago. "Yes, sir." "Let me get it." She climbed the short ladder and handed it to him. Their eyes met briefly, and Elena couldn't help but notice the flicker of sadness there. He thanked her, giving her the faintest smile, and she stepped aside. It was a simple interaction, just a few words, a simple request, but it left her feeling breathless. She never forgot the sadness, or that tiny glimmer of warmth he allowed himself to show when she handed him the book. From that point on, Adrian appeared at random times. Sometimes he would see her cleaning the windows in his home office. He never said much, just a polite greeting or a short question about whether she had seen some document he had misplaced. Each encounter was brief, but Elena was always mindful of her tone and posture. She did not want to lose the respect she had earned. She did not want him to regret hiring her. Yet, whenever she saw him, she sensed a kind of heaviness that followed him like a shadow. She caught fleeting looks on his face when he thought no one was looking. She saw lines of stress on his forehead. She often wondered what weighed on him. She did not have the courage to ask, nor did she think it was her place. One night, Elena had finished her tasks, but stayed in the staff kitchen to help an older maid, Mrs. Florence, wash some dishes. It was already past dinner, and most of the staff had retired to their quarters. "Elena," Mrs. Florence said quietly, "you've been such a help here. We're lucky to have you." Elena smiled shyly, continuing to dry the plates. "I'm glad to be here. This job means a lot to me." Mrs. Florence smiled back. "You're very hardworking. Don't let anyone take advantage of you, dear. Just keep doing what you do." After they finished, Elena decided to take a short walk around the grounds. Sometimes she liked to stand on the terrace to catch some fresh air. The night sky was clear, and the crescent moon glowed softly. She relaxed at the sight of the quiet gardens, lit by small lanterns. The roses looked like dark silhouettes in the pale light. As she turned to return inside, she saw a figure standing near the edge of the garden, barely visible in the shadows. Her heart jumped. Who else would be out here so late? She squinted, then recognized the figure's tall, lean shape. It was Adrian. He was alone, standing by a marble railing, gazing at the city lights that flickered beyond the mansion's walls. He did not move for a long time. She could not see his face clearly, but she sensed the heaviness in his posture. She debated whether to slip away silently or offer a polite good evening. In the end, she decided to speak. "Am Mr. Knight?" she whispered. He turned. Moonlight illuminated his face, highlighting the sadness in his eyes. "Elena," he said softly, remembering her name. "What are you doing out here?" "I finished my tasks and wanted some fresh air," she answered. She lowered her head respectfully. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." He shook his head. "No, it's fine. This is your home too, in a way." She swallowed, caught off guard by his friendly tone. There was a sort of quiet kindness in his voice. She also noticed how weary he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, a tension in the set of his jaw. "I like looking at the city lights," he told her after a moment. "It reminds me how big the world is." She nodded, stepping a bit closer, drawn by a strange sense of empathy. "Yes, sir," she murmured. He studied her for a breath. "You don't have to call me sir all the time. At least not when we're out here. I'm just Adrian." Elena was not sure how to respond. She had never seen this vulnerable side of him before. Finally, she said, "All right, Adrian." He let out a small sigh. "Long day," he murmured, as if apologizing for his mood. Without thinking, Elena said softly, "I hope you can find some rest." He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise on his face. Then he gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Elena," he said simply. "I appreciate that." They stood there for a few more minutes. The night was silent, and so were they. But in that silence, an understanding seemed to pass between them. He was not just her employer, and she was not just a maid. They were two people bound by a quiet moment, both of them lonely in their own way. Shortly after, Adrian excused himself, returning inside with slow steps. Elena watched him go, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. She did not know how or why, but she felt a small shift in her heart. For the first time, she saw him as a man weighed down by sorrow, and she wanted to comfort him. The days turned into weeks, and Elena found herself picking up pieces of Adrian's story through small encounters, hushed staff gossip, and subtle clues around the mansion. She learned that Adrian had lost his parents in a tragic accident when he was in his early 20s. They had left him their thriving family business, which he expanded into a massive empire. The staff whispered about how he never fully recovered from his parents' death. Some said that he had no other family, no siblings, no close cousins. Elena wondered if that was why he seemed so guarded. She also heard rumors that he had been betrayed by people he once trusted, close friends who used him for money or power. Each betrayal drove him deeper into isolation. Each heartbreak made him distrustful. Elena often saw how he handled staff disputes with calm efficiency, rarely raising his voice. He showed understanding toward those who worked hard, but he fired people immediately if they were caught being dishonest. He seemed a man who had been hurt too many times and could not tolerate dishonesty anymore. Whenever Elena was called to clean his study, she would find small reminders of his past, an old photo of Adrian with his parents, standing in front of the mansion's main gate. A father's proud smile, a mother's loving gaze, and a young Adrian with a wide grin. She would gently dust the frame and feel a pang in her heart, recalling how it must haunt him to remember how quickly life can change. Though Elena did not speak much to Adrian about personal matters, she sometimes caught glimpses of what he was truly feeling. One quiet evening, she was tidying a stack of papers on his desk when he entered. He gave her a faint smile. "Thank you, Elena," he said. "You always keep this place so organized." "I appreciate it." She felt a warmth flutter in her chest. "I'm just doing my job," she replied softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Still, it means a lot to me, especially on days like these when everything else seems so chaotic." "Are you all right?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her in surprise. For a second, Elena thought she had crossed a line. But Adrian only sighed again. "I'll be fine," he said quietly, not elaborating. She nodded, biting her lip, unsure if she should offer more comfort. In her heart, she wanted to tell him she understood. She wanted to say that if he ever needed someone to listen, she was there. But she was only the maid, and she feared stepping out of her place. So she stayed silent, hoping that one day he would share his burdens if he wished. The turning point came when Adrian decided to throw a grand party to mark the success of his latest business venture. Invitations went out to the most influential people in the city, politicians, celebrities, fellow business magnates. The date was set, and the mansion buzzed with preparations. Elena, along with the rest of the staff, worked tirelessly to polish every surface, arrange every flower, and ensure every corner of the mansion was spotless. Caterers were hired, along with a famous orchestra. Adrian spared no expense in making the night one to remember. 2 days before the party, Elena was in the staff break room when Mrs. Florence came in with a letter in her hand. She waved it at Elena, her eyes wide with excitement. "Look at this," Mrs. Florence said, handing the envelope to Elena. "It's for you." Elena's heart stuttered. She took the envelope and recognized the official Night Mansion seal on it. She opened it with trembling fingers. The letter inside was brief. "Miss Elena Martinez, you are cordially invited to attend the celebration this Friday at Night Mansion. Your presence is requested at the event to be held in the Grand Ballroom at 8 p.m. Sincerely, Adrian Knight." Elena gasped. She was just a maid. Why would Adrian invite her as a guest? Staff members would be there, of course, but only to serve. They would not be part of the official guest list. Mrs. Florence laughed at Elena's wide eyes. "He must have taken a liking to you, dear. I've never heard of Mr. Knight personally inviting any staff member to one of his grand parties." Elena's face heated. "No, it can't be that. Maybe he needs me to help in the background," she reasoned, trying to calm herself. But no further instructions came. Instead, the next day, a tailor arrived with a beautiful gown, specifically made for Elena. The shimmering gold material was tasteful, simple, yet elegant. It arrived with a note that said, "Please wear this to the celebration." A.K. Elena's pulse fluttered with a mix of excitement and confusion. She was not used to wearing fancy clothes. She imagined how she might look in that dress. She tried it on in the privacy of her room, the silky fabric hugging her figure in a gentle way. She felt like an entirely different person. The staff teased her good-naturedly, whispering that she must have done something to impress the boss. Some joked about a secret romance. Others assumed it was a professional courtesy of some sort. Elena did not know what to say or think. In truth, her heart hammered whenever she thought about meeting Adrian's gaze in that dress. Friday came, and the mansion transformed into a sparkling wonderland. Hundreds of glittering lights, fresh flowers in every corner, and a red carpet at the main entrance. Luxury cars and limousines lined up, their passengers stepping out in designer suits and gowns. Photographers stationed outside to capture the arrivals. Elena dressed in her room, feeling butterflies in her stomach. She had never worn such a beautiful dress. She styled her hair simply, pinning it up gently, leaving a few soft strands to frame her face. Her heart pounded with nervous anticipation. When she finally left her room, she avoided the staff corridors and walked toward the ballroom. She felt eyes on her, staff members staring at her in awe. She overheard them whisper about how she looked so different. A sense of uncertainty weighed on her. She was only a maid. Did she really belong among the wealthy guests? Would they mock her if they found out who she was? Her mind spun with anxious questions. Still, she told herself that Adrian had personally invited her, so there must be a reason. She clutched the small purse that matched her gown, trying to summon courage. The ballroom doors were wide open, revealing a room full of elegantly dressed guests. The orchestra played lively music, and waiters in black and white uniforms carried trays of champagne. The chatter was loud, and the chandeliers sparkled overhead. Elena took a few hesitant steps inside, her eyes adjusting to the brightness. She stood by the doorway, not sure where to go or what to do. She felt exposed, like an outsider. But then she sensed someone approaching. She turned and saw Adrian Knight himself, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. He looked even more regal than usual, his hair styled perfectly, his eyes keen and focused. He offered her a polite smile. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice low. Elena struggled to find her voice. "Thank you for inviting me," she managed. He looked her up and down, and she noticed the way his gaze lingered on her face. For a moment, it seemed he was seeing her in a new light. "The dress looks perfect on you," he said. Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you," she repeated, unsure of what else to say. Adrian led her deeper into the room, introducing her to a few people as someone who had helped him keep his home in perfect shape. He spoke kindly about her work ethic, but Elena sensed the curiosity of the onlookers. Some raised their brows, others looked politely impressed, and a few whispered behind their glasses of champagne. She tried to stand tall and smile politely, but her nerves would not settle. Over the next hour, more and more guests arrived. Adrian greeted them, accepted congratulations on his success, and introduced Elena whenever possible. She felt like she was in a dream, floating among people who were far above her social station. Yet Adrian seemed determined to include her, as if he wanted her to experience this side of his world. As the night went on, Elena began to notice that Adrian was smiling less and less. Though he put on a gracious face for his guests, she could see the strain in his eyes. He was receiving constant praise, but something weighed on him. Occasionally, she would catch him fidgeting with his cufflinks or looking down at the floor. She wanted to ask if he was all right, but each time, he was pulled away by another group wanting his attention. Finally, near the halfway point of the evening, Adrian made a short speech thanking everyone for coming. His voice was steady, and he managed to sound confident. But toward the end of his speech, Elena saw his hands tremble on the microphone. Once he finished, he stepped down from the small stage, shaking hands with a few important guests. Then he made a quick exit, telling them he needed to check on something. Elena felt a knot in her stomach. She sensed that something was wrong. A hush fell among the crowd as some turned to each other, wondering if Adrian was unwell or simply overwhelmed. 15 minutes passed. 20. Adrian did not return. Elena excused herself from a conversation with a kind older couple. She slipped away and began searching for Adrian through the mansion corridors. She had a feeling that he had isolated himself to keep from breaking down in front of so many people. She found him in the far corner of the hallway outside the library, staring at the family portrait that hung on the wall. It showed him with his parents, all smiling. He stood very still, his shoulders tense. She could see the heartbreak in his reflection on the glass frame. "Mr. Knight," she whispered. He looked over at her, eyes distant. "Elena," he said. "I just need a moment. It's noisy in there." She approached gently. "Are you all right?" He gave a weary smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he lied. She took a breath. "You can tell me if you're not." "It's okay." His gaze flicked away. "It's just nights like these, I wish my parents were here. They would have been proud. Or maybe not. Maybe they would have wanted me to live differently, to be less consumed by business, to have a normal life. I don't know." Elena listened carefully. She could almost feel his loneliness. "They would be proud," she said softly. "You've accomplished so much. And you've made sure everyone under your roof is taken care of. I'm certain they would be proud of your kindness." He looked at her with a ghost of a smile. "You're too good, Elena. You see the best in me, but sometimes I can't see it myself." She longed to say more, to comfort him. But she did not want to overstep. So she reached out and gently placed a hand on his arm. "We should go back soon, or people will worry." He blinked, as if returning to the present. "Right," he murmured. Then he straightened his jacket. "Let's go." They walked back to the ballroom together, a silent understanding between them. Elena felt her heart ache for him. She wished he could find peace. Back in the ballroom, the festivities continued. The orchestra played a sweet, slow tune. Adrian politely danced with a couple of esteemed guests who asked for the honor. He seemed to recover some composure, but Elena could tell he was only partly there. His mind was elsewhere, locked in sorrow. As the evening wound down, dinner was served. Dazzling courses of fine cuisine appeared on silver trays. Wine flowed freely. Speeches were made by associates praising Adrian for his business acumen. He accepted the praise with humble nods, but each word appeared to tighten the coil of sadness in his heart. Elena, standing to the side, watched him with growing concern. She could see the signs. His gaze grew hollow, he was fidgety, and his breathing seemed shallow whenever someone showered him with compliments about how he had built an empire on his own. She recalled how the staff gossip said he hated being reminded that he had no family by his side. Perhaps every mention of his achievements only reminded him of who was missing. When dinner ended, the music began again. People started heading to the dance floor in pairs. Elena watched with a small smile as couples swirled gracefully. She, however, felt too shy to dance. She had barely stepped onto a dance floor in her life. Instead, she sipped some water from a flute and considered returning to the staff area so she would not be in the way. But something inside her hesitated. She kept her eyes on Adrian, who was standing near the dais, looking tired. Out of nowhere, a man she recognized as a major investor approached Adrian and began to speak. Elena could not hear their conversation over the music, but she saw Adrian's polite smile fade. Then, to her alarm, Adrian pressed his palm against his chest. His lips parted as though struggling for air. The investor seemed to notice Adrian's distress, but he continued speaking. Perhaps he thought Adrian was just reacting to stress. Adrian nodded absently, trying to maintain composure, but Elena noticed him clench his fists behind his back. She had seen him do that once before, on another stressful day. It was a sign he was on the brink of something, anger, fear, or sorrow. She took a breath. She thought of heading over to see if she could help, but she was uncertain. She was just a maid, and the crowd was full of powerful people. Still, her concern for Adrian outweighed her worries about rank. She inched closer to them, hoping that she could intervene if something went wrong. What happened next would be etched in Elena's mind forever. Adrian, still cornered by the investor's conversation, suddenly inhaled sharply. His eyes flicked with panic, like he was about to crumble. Perhaps the weight of all the memories, the stress, the achievements, and the absence of his parents was too much. Elena could not stand by. She moved forward, her heart pounding so loudly it roared in her ears. The music was still playing, and couples were still dancing, unaware that Adrian Knight was unraveling. She stepped in front of the investor, gently but firmly interrupting. Adrian turned to her, and in his eyes, she saw both surprise and desperate relief. And in that moment, Elena did something she never thought she would do. She reached up, cupped Adrian's face with her trembling hands, and kissed him. It was not a planned move. It came from a place deep inside her, a fierce desire to save him from a collapse she knew was coming. Everything seemed to slow down. She felt the softness of his lips, the warmth of his skin, and the shudder of his breath. The entire ballroom went silent. The orchestra's tune screeched to a stop. Elena's mind screamed at her that she had crossed every boundary. But she did not let go. She wanted him to know that, in this moment, he was not alone. When she finally pulled back, her eyes locked with his. A hush settled across the ballroom as guests stood frozen, their gazes fixed on the billionaire and the maid. Elena felt her cheeks burn, and she was certain everyone could hear her heartbeat. Adrian stood there, stunned. For a second, it seemed as if he could not breathe. Then his eyes brimmed with tears, a sight Elena never expected to see in public. He raised a hand to his mouth, as if in disbelief, and let out a quiet sob. That sob broke into a full wave of tears. Adrian Knight, the most powerful man in the room, fell to his knees, covering his face with shaking hands. Gasps rippled among the guests. Some inched forward, but no one dared to interfere. Elena's heart ached. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back. She heard the guests murmur in confusion. Some looked at her with shock. Others turned their eyes away. Cameras flashed, capturing a scene of raw emotion that no one could have predicted. Adrian's sobs grew stronger, and Elena felt tears prick her own eyes. Her hand trembled on his shoulder, but she stayed, offering him silent support in his most vulnerable moment. She realized the magnitude of her actions. She had just displayed affection to her employer in a very public manner. She had broken societal rules and every professional boundary. Yet in that instant, none of it mattered compared to the agony Adrian was going through. After what felt like hours, though it was only a minute or two, Adrian managed to catch his breath. He blinked and looked up at Elena, tears streaking his handsome face. The hush around them remained. Music was absent, replaced by the soft whispers of the crowd. Elena gently wiped a tear from Adrian's cheek. It felt unreal, as if she was still dreaming. But the pounding in her chest reminded her this was no dream. Slowly, Adrian stood, and Elena rose with him, her arms still around his waist for support. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. Then, with a shaking voice, he addressed the stunned crowd. "I apologize," he began, his words faltering. "I've had a difficult moment, and Elena, she brought me back from it." A wave of murmurs spread among the guests. Some gazed on with sympathy, others with shock, and a few with thinly veiled judgment. Adrian continued, "I know this is strange, but sometimes life overwhelms us. You all think I have everything: wealth, success, influence. But the truth is, every day I carry a heavy burden of loss and loneliness." He paused, his voice breaking again. Elena felt her heart crack at the sight of his raw emotion. "My parents, they were my world," he said, tears gleaming in his eyes. "When they died, a part of me died with them. I threw myself into building this empire, hoping to fill the emptiness. But tonight of all nights, I realized how alone I truly felt. And then Elena." He turned to her, voice trembling. "Elena reminded me that there are still people who care, not because of my money or my status, but because they see the person behind all that. She's someone who saw my pain." The crowd stayed quiet. Some dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs, moved by his confession. Others stood stiffly, unsure how to react. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment, as though fighting back another flood of tears. When he reopened them, he looked at Elena with the deepest gratitude she had ever seen. "Elena," he said softly, "I'm sorry if this caused you any trouble. I didn't mean for you to be swept into my problems." She shook her head, voice trembling. "You didn't cause me trouble, Mr. Knight. I just couldn't bear to watch you suffer alone." He gently took her hand, lifting it in a comforting gesture. The crowd looked on, many of them wide-eyed. In that moment, no one asked about her status. No one demanded explanations. They had witnessed raw human emotion, something that money could not hide or solve. They saw a man breaking and a woman brave enough to hold him. The rest of the evening was a blur. Adrian excused himself shortly after, taking Elena's arm and guiding her out of the ballroom. Staff and guests parted like waves, allowing them space. The hush was replaced by the hum of resumed music, but it was subdued, as if everyone was trying to process what they had just seen. Adrian led Elena to a small sitting room off the main hallway. He closed the door behind them, shutting out the noise and prying eyes. He seemed more composed but still shaken. Elena waited, uncertain what to say. Was he angry with her? Did he regret the kiss? She fidgeted with the hem of her dress. He turned to her, tears still clinging to his lashes. "Elena," he began softly, "why did you do that? Why risk so much?" She swallowed hard. "I couldn't bear to see you in pain," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I know it wasn't my place, and I'm sorry if I crossed a line. But you looked like you were about to collapse, and all I could think was to pull you out of it." Adrian exhaled, stepping closer. "You have a kind heart," he said, his tone gentle. "But you must know the rumors this will cause. The gossip. And you might be judged unfairly." She lowered her eyes. "I know, but I couldn't stand by." He hesitated, then placed a hand under her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. "I owe you my thanks. You saved me from a dark moment. I've never felt so overwhelmed. It's hard to explain. Tonight reminded me of everything I lost, how my parents are gone, how I've been betrayed by people I trusted. I felt so empty. And then you gave me a reason to believe someone truly cared." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to comfort him, so she brought her hand up to gently wipe away the tears on his cheek. "I do care," she whispered. "I can't stand by and watch you hurt." He nodded, then softly pulled her into a warm embrace. She felt his heart thudding against her own. It was surreal. She had never expected to be so close to him. Yet it felt natural, as if in their shared loneliness, they had found solace in each other. They stayed like that for a long moment, letting the world outside carry on. Finally, Adrian pulled back, his expression more steady. "We should go out there," he said. "I need to address any confusion." Elena hesitated. "All right," she agreed softly. "I'll stand by you." He squeezed her hand in gratitude. News travels fast, especially in a room full of the rich and powerful. By the time Adrian and Elena re-entered the ballroom, many guests had taken their seats. The whispering was intense, but nobody left. Everyone seemed curious about the story behind the dramatic scene. Adrian cleared his throat, tapping a microphone to gain attention. "I apologize for the emotional display earlier," he began. His voice was stronger now, though still tinged with sadness. "I want to explain something to you all. Tonight, I had a moment of weakness, a reminder that no matter how strong or successful we appear, we are all human. We all need someone who can show us kindness." He gestured toward Elena, who stood quietly by his side. "Elena is not just a staff member in my home. She is someone who sees me as a person, not just a billionaire. In my weakest moment, she stepped forward to comfort me, and I will always be grateful." A murmur of acknowledgement washed over the crowd. Some nodded in understanding, others still looked shocked. Adrian continued, "I understand the surprise you all must have felt. Believe me, it was a surprise to me as well. But from now on, I ask that you respect Elena for her compassion and treat her with the dignity she deserves." He paused, glancing at her with a soft expression. Then he let out a slight sigh. "Now, please enjoy the rest of the evening. Let the music continue." The orchestra resumed playing, and though the mood was subdued, the tension in the air lessened. People rose from their seats, some returning to their conversations, some still stealing glances at Adrian and Elena. Over time, a few guests cautiously approached, offering kind words or gentle reassurances. Elena, still feeling overwhelmed, kept close to Adrian's side. She noticed that while some whispered or stared at her, others smiled reassuringly. She wondered what the morning news would say. She worried about the staff gossip. Yet every time doubt crept in, she remembered the look of desperation on Adrian's face before she kissed him. She felt no regret, only relief that she had been there for him. Later that night, when most guests had departed, Adrian found Elena in the quieter part of the ballroom, near the tall windows. He sat beside her, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She offered him a gentle look of concern. "Are you feeling better now?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly. "Better, yes. Though I know there will be a storm of gossip tomorrow." Elena frowned. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to embarrass you." Adrian shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You gave me courage. In a strange way, you helped me accept the fact that I'm still grieving and that I don't have to hide it all the time." He fell silent, and Elena reached over to touch his hand. "You cried so strongly," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What made you break down like that?" Adrian sighed, staring at his hands. "It was everything. The memories of my parents, the pressure of being in the spotlight, the success that feels hollow without people to share it with. But tonight, I felt it all crush me. I had arranged this grand celebration, and yet, deep inside, I was screaming for some connection, some warmth. Then, when you kissed me, you gave me that warmth. I felt overwhelmed by my own longing. That's why I burst into tears. It was as if all my defenses cracked at once." Elena felt tears in her own eyes. She laced her fingers with his, offering quiet comfort. "I'm sorry you've been so lonely. If there's anything I can do, I want to help." He looked at her with gratitude. "You already have." They sat there, gazing at each other, emotions swirling in the hushed light of the nearly empty ballroom. Though so much had happened in just one night, Elena sensed a door had opened, one that could lead to deeper understanding and possibly love. The next morning brought a flurry of media attention. Photographs of the moment Elena kissed Adrian appeared online, stirring scandal and curiosity. Headlines ranged from Billionaire's breakdown to mysterious Maid captures Knight's heart. Rumors flew, some suggesting Elena was a gold digger, others claiming that Adrian had staged the scene for publicity. Elena tried to keep her head down, continuing her duties. Yet she felt uneasy under the weight of such intense scrutiny. Adrian, on the other hand, had no choice but to face it. Journalists called his office nonstop, wanting statements or interviews. His PR team wanted him to give a press release. He calmly refused, stating that he wanted to handle the situation in his own way. Inside the mansion, some of the staff gave Elena wide-eyed stares. A few teased her lightly, but most supported her quietly, especially those who knew how kind she was. Mrs. Florence took her aside one day, patting her hand kindly. "Dear child, you have a pure heart," she said. "Anyone can see that. Don't let the tabloids get to you. Mr. Knight clearly trusts you, so hold your head up high." Elena thanked her, tears welling in her eyes. She wondered if she would be allowed to remain as part of the household staff after causing such a stir. But Adrian never asked her to leave. In fact, he reached out to her more often, inviting her to join him for coffee or a chat in his study. In these quiet moments, they bonded over simple things, favorite books, childhood memories, funny anecdotes. He discovered that she loved romance stories, and she learned that he secretly enjoyed old classical music recordings of his mother's. Each shared moment felt like a step toward healing for both of them. As the weeks passed, the media storm died down, replaced by newer, more sensational news. But not everyone forgot about the scandal. Some business associates whispered behind Adrian's back, and some staff from other circles spread rumors about Elena's relationship with him. One day, Adrian decided to hold a private dinner for a small group of close friends and key business partners. He invited Elena to sit at the table as well. She was nervous but pleased. She wore a modest but pretty dress, and she followed Adrian into the cozy dining room where the guests were gathered. Most of the guests treated her courteously, though a few eyed her with mild suspicion. As the dinner progressed, however, Elena's shy charm won them over. She spoke softly, never exaggerating or trying to show off. She listened more than she talked, but when asked a question, she answered with sincerity. Adrian frequently glanced her way, giving her supportive smiles. After dessert, the party split into smaller conversations. One older gentleman, a longtime associate of Adrian's father, cornered Elena near the dessert cart. He had a mild expression, but his words were firm. "You're Elena, correct?" he asked. "Yes," she answered, her nerves flaring. He nodded thoughtfully. "You seem like a good person. I've known Adrian since he was a child, and I saw how he suffered after losing his parents. He doesn't let people close easily. I'm sure you know that." She nodded again, uncertain where this was going. He gave a half smile. "Whatever your relationship with him is, you'd better be genuine. If you toy with his feelings or betray him, it will destroy him. Understand?" Elena felt a lump in her throat. She realized this man was not threatening her, but warning her. Adrian's heart was fragile, and she held some power to hurt or heal him. She met the man's eyes and said quietly, "I do care about him, sir. I promise I'm not trying to take advantage." The man studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Good," he said simply, before walking away. That brief conversation weighed on Elena's mind. She knew trust was vital to Adrian. She also knew that opening his heart again was a huge risk for him. She vowed to be gentle and honest with him, no matter the circumstance. In the following months, a quiet romance began to blossom between Adrian and Elena. He no longer insisted that she maintain the strict formality of Mr. Knight whenever they were alone. He confided in her about his fears, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. She, in turn, told him about her parents' humble life, her own dreams of maybe one day opening a small bookstore. They spent afternoons strolling in the mansion gardens, talking in soft voices. They listened to music in his study, sometimes reading side by side in companionable silence. Elena would still attend to her maid duties, but Adrian subtly ensured her workload was lighter, not wanting her to be exhausted. He also respected her privacy and never forced her to spend time with him if she was tired or busy. The household staff noticed the budding closeness, and for the most part, they were happy for Elena. Some teased her gently, others offered advice. A few were envious, but no one openly resented her. Adrian had always been a fair employer, and they trusted his judgment. On one sunny afternoon, while they walked among the roses, Elena gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you really invite me to that party that night?" "I was just a maid." He stopped, turning toward her, the sun highlighting the sadness and warmth in his eyes. "I saw something in you, Elena. You were gentle, and you never tried to push your way into my life. I wanted you to have the chance to experience a grand celebration, to see a world you never had the opportunity to see before. And selfishly, I wanted someone there who didn't see me as just a billionaire. Someone who actually saw me." Her heart fluttered at his confession. "I'm glad you invited me," she said softly. He nodded, leaning in slightly. "That night changed everything for me." She felt the warmth of his nearness, and for a moment, the memory of the daring kiss flitted through her mind. She could still recall the hush that fell over the crowd, the shock and the tears. Yet, looking at Adrian now, seeing him stronger and calmer, she had no regrets. He reached for her hand, pressing it gently against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and warm. "I know I can't erase the loneliness completely," he said, "but each day with you feels a little brighter." She smiled up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You make my days brighter too," she whispered. He softly cupped her cheek, and she closed her eyes. They stood there in the garden, letting the gentle breeze carry away the pain of the past. In that moment, it was only them and the soft rustle of leaves. However, with closeness came new fears and insecurities. Elena sometimes worried she was not worthy of Adrian. She was not from a wealthy family, and she had no fancy education. Adrian reassured her over and over that none of that mattered. He valued her heart, her kindness, and the genuine warmth she offered. Adrian, for his part, battled fears of betrayal. Memories of past betrayals made him jump at shadows. If Elena left the mansion to visit her parents or friends, he sometimes worried she might not return. He knew it was irrational, but his mind would replay the times he had been abandoned or used. Elena felt his tension and gently reminded him she had no intention of leaving him. Little by little, they helped each other heal. He learned to trust again. She learned to see her own worth. Their bond grew stronger, though they still kept it somewhat private. They were not sure how the world would react, or if it would even matter. They were content to focus on building a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. Time passed quickly. A year after that fateful kiss in the ballroom, Adrian decided to hold a smaller, more personal celebration to honor the continued growth of his company and the partnerships he had formed. It was nowhere near as grand as the previous year's party. He kept it intimate, only close friends, trusted associates, and loyal staff. Elena also helped plan the event this time. She wanted it to reflect Adrian's softer side. There would be less pomp, more genuine camaraderie. She arranged for gentle music, simple but elegant decorations, and a buffet-style dinner instead of a formal multi-course meal. Adrian appreciated her touches, and he told her so repeatedly. On the night of the event, Elena wore a lovely pale blue dress Adrian had given her. It suited her gentle style. She greeted the guests with a warm smile, her nervousness far less than the year before. She had grown more confident, more comfortable with Adrian's circle. Adrian made a short speech, thanking everyone for their support. He acknowledged how much had changed since the last celebration, when he had almost broken down completely. He spoke briefly of his gratitude for the people in his life who had shown him kindness and loyalty. Many in the room knew he was referring to Elena, and they smiled or nodded. The gossip and scandal from a year ago had mostly faded. Some had come to admire Elena for her genuine nature. Others saw how Adrian had become happier and more open in the months since she entered his life more fully. After the speech, the music began. Adrian moved across the room to where Elena stood by a tall arrangement of white lilies. He extended his hand. "Dance with me?" he asked softly. She felt her heart skip. I'm not very good at dancing." He smiled, a gentle warmth lighting his face. "I'll lead." She nodded, placing her hand in his. He guided her onto the makeshift dance floor. The soft melody enveloped them, and they began to sway slowly. She clung to him, trusting his lead, letting the gentle rhythm of the music carry them. Guests watched, smiling at the sight of Adrian Knight dancing with the woman who had stolen his heart. But for the couple themselves, the world seemed to melt away, leaving only the sweet motion of their dance and the tender feelings they shared. As the song reached its quiet end, Adrian leaned in, pressing a kiss to Elena's forehead. She felt a surge of emotion, recalling how a year ago it was she who had kissed him first, so boldly, so desperately. Now here they were, dancing in front of everyone, hearts open, fear melting into hope. Not long after that second celebration, Adrian and Elena stood in the mansion's rose garden under a gentle morning sun. The staff and a few close friends had gathered. It was a small, private ceremony, but it meant the world to them. Elena wore a simple, elegant white dress, her hair pinned with small blossoms. Adrian stood across from her in a crisp suit, tears shimmering in his eyes. They held hands tightly. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses. An officiant spoke soft words of love and commitment. Adrian vowed to cherish Elena, to honor her heart, and to trust in her kindness. Elena vowed to stand by him, to support him in his darkest hours, and to share in his joys. Their promises were simple, yet profound. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, they sealed their vows with a tender kiss. The staff clapped, some wiping tears of happiness. Mrs. Florence grinned widely, remembering how Elena had been just a quiet maid when she first arrived. Adrian led Elena down the short aisle, their fingers entwined. In that moment, he did not think about the empire he had built, or the wealth he possessed. He thought only of the miracle that he had found someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. He felt a sense of peace he had never known before. They held a small reception right there in the garden, tables set with fresh flowers and simple, delicious food. Adrian and Elena mingled with their guests, receiving warm congratulations. A few of Adrian's close business friends teased him happily, saying that love had softened his stern edges. He smiled and admitted they were right. Elena's parents arrived, full of pride. They hugged their daughter tightly, tears streaming down their cheeks at her happiness. They praised Adrian for his kindness. He, in turn, expressed his respect for their hard work and the values they had taught Elena. As the sun rose higher in the sky, laughter and music filled the air. Elena glanced around, soaking in the sights of her new family, made up of loyal staff, trusted friends, and most importantly, Adrian Knight, her new husband. She felt her heart swell with gratitude for the journey that had led them here. In a quiet corner, away from the buzz of a reception, Adrian took Elena's hands in his. "Do you remember the night you kissed me in front of everyone?" he asked with a playful grin. She blushed, remembering how fearful yet determined she had been. "I do. I'll never forget it." He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "That moment saved me," he confessed. "I was breaking under my own sadness, but you reached out and showed me that I wasn't alone. I cried like a child that night, but it was the release I needed. If you hadn't done that, I might never have realized how much I needed true connection." Elena touched his cheek gently. "I'm just grateful I found the courage." Adrian's smile turned affectionate. "I'm grateful too. I was terrified of letting someone into my heart again, but you made me believe in love." He kissed her softly, and she melted against him, forgetting the world around them. In that kiss, she tasted the sweetness of a shared promise that they would support each other, heal each other, and face life's trials together. The months turned into years, and Adrian's company continued to flourish. He remained a formidable businessman, but he was no longer known just for his stoicism. People spoke of his generosity, his softer spirit. He and Elena supported various charities, focusing on causes that helped orphan children, a group Adrian felt a personal connection to since he had lost his parents too soon. In the mansion, life took on a warmer glow. The staff felt more relaxed around Adrian, who had learned to smile more freely. Elena continued to manage the household in a way that made everyone feel valued. She was not just the lady of the house, but a friend to the staff who remembered when she had been one of them. Sometimes, late at night, Elena would find Adrian in his home office, looking at old family photos. She would slip her arms around him, resting her chin on his shoulder. He would turn and kiss her cheek, whispering a soft thank you. Neither needed to say much more. Their bond spoke volumes, reminding them of where they had come from and how far they had journeyed together. In the quiet hush before dawn, Adrian would sometimes wake, haunted by the memory of his parents. In those moments, he would see Elena sleeping peacefully beside him, and he would recall her daring kiss from so long ago, the very act that had broken his wall of loneliness. He would hold her close, feeling the thud of her heartbeat, and the darkness would recede. A few years later, when their first child was born, a boy with bright eyes, Adrian held him in trembling arms and cried tears of joy. He felt his parents' presence in that moment, and he knew they were proud. He vowed to be the best father he could be, carrying forward the love he once lost but rediscovered in Elena. And so, in a world where wealth and status often overshadow the heart, the improbable love between a maid and a billionaire became a shining proof that tenderness and genuine care can bridge any gap. The scandal of a kiss in front of everyone turned into a legend retold with wonder and warmth, a moment of raw vulnerability that led to a lifetime of happiness. No matter what challenges life threw at them, Adrian and Elena faced them hand in hand. For in that single risky kiss, they had found not shame, but salvation. And as the years went by, they never forgot the truth revealed on that unforgettable night. Sometimes, the most heartfelt connections bloom in the unlikeliest of places, and a single act of love can mend the deepest wounds and bring forth a future bright with hope.